that awkward moment where after defeating a demon army, you go back home, and instead of being welcomed with open arms and cheers, you're frowned upon because you seem like more of a monster than the monsters that they were originally scared of. And even though the king respects you, thinks you're a good guy, unless he wants to be as kind of thrown off the throne, ultimately he has to banish you, and instead of just waiting and hoping maybe things change, you hear about a job opening with the army you just destroyed, and the demon lord wants nothing to do with you. And the idea of a month-long trial of working with the top generals that you completely obliterated to see if you're worthy of working for Her Highness is honestly a pretty interesting premise. I mean, honestly, had you rewound this premise up like when it started up and him traveling, it would have been decent. It would have been something that's slightly different just because he kind of takes it almost like a one-punch man at a time. But the idea of starting it at the end of where most fantasy isekai kind of like hero stories go is pretty damn fantastic. And this one, I've been interested to see how it would pull it off, because to me, it either would be a very funny show or it would be a very serious show. I wasn't really thinking it would have a middle ground. I thought it was going to be one of those two extremes. And from what I know of the source material, which is very little, I just heard rumblings from source readers, the intro to the story has a bit more like jarringness in terms of being funny than being serious, being funny than being serious. But I think from what I've been hearing, eventually once it finds its footing, it puts the emphasis more on the serious, which kind of makes sense given the fact that, you know, the actual mental distress of basically being thrown on your ass after saving the world, it's going to mess with a lot of people. The thing that I think makes this even more slightly different, which is something they didn't need to do, but I was pleasantly surprised by when they brought it up, which was right at the end of the episode, we get to see the Demon Lord and what she said at one point during the war, or the rebellion, whatever you want to call it, right? There's a moment where you see like orcs, ogres, whatever they are, these monsters, and it looks like they're torturing humans. She pops up and says, "What did I say? No mindless killing, no pointless killing. We're not here to just hurt people for the sake of it." It almost felt like she was saying, "I'm here to save him." And even though the king didn't give me any like vibes that he was a piece of shit, I do think the kingdom definitely was in need of some new rulership if that's the type of people that can force a hero to be thrown on his ass. And don't get me wrong, the hero Leo definitely has an arrogant personality, but nothing from what I saw necessarily gave me the impression that society should 100% shun him for his actions. Sure, the adventure party he went with basically got left in the dust and left behind. But the idea of someone who, like, even in the rumblings afterwards, right, he's basically having to hide his identity because he's viewed as a monster. And the idea that you hear, like, these rumblings from people being like, "I can't believe the demon army is going to try to fight us again. They're hiring. What a bunch of fools. The hero destroyed them." So they recognize that the hero saved them, but they also recognize the fact that maybe he's too scary to be around. And it's an interesting premise. That's what I like about it, is that it basically plays with all of the fundamentals you're probably used to in the fantasy genre, but the idea of starting it at the end where most shows end up going, and instead doing something that's pretty silly and ridiculous, but also serious when you strip it down to the emotional layers, is pretty fantastic. I was actually pleasantly surprised by the generals. I actually thought they were going to be a lot more violent, but I love the idea that everyone seems like more on the hero protagonist side on this world's enemy side than the general civilians did. Like, they just seemed like, I don't know, they seemed like the ogres. They seemed like the horrible monsters, just frowning and just seeming like pieces of shit. And then you meet, like, the generals. You have this big dude who reminds me of Ryder from Fate Zero. Just a very jolly fellow, likes to fight, respects someone who can kick his ass. Apparently, most likely is the strongest out of that group there, but he's not the most intelligent, so it's an easy fight. You have probably the funniest point in the episode where you have this like beast girl who, I guess in their culture, if you defeat them in battle, that basically means that you're going to marry them someday. And the idea that the most important thing in post-war, pre-war, whatever it is, the idea of, you know, the strategy, the rebuilding, you know, the planning, the key points were given to this girl. And she is an airhead. She has the intelligence and maturity of an 8-year-old. And I love the fact that Leo's like, you put her in charge of this, and they're like, we're scrambled to give us a break. I thought in terms of like just really setting up a premise and establishing its characters and the world, this is actually one of the stronger first episodes for a fantasy shows that, honestly, comparing last year's fantasy shows and this that I've seen. Mainly because, like, from minute one, the opening shots, the establishing shots, seeing the destruction, the ruin, seeing them basically repair from what is honestly basically nothing, to then seeing him just so casually bring out a presentation, being like, this is what I can do for you, as he's continuously getting shot by fire, not doing a hell of a lot, but it establishes that clearly we know what a demon lord is, she is one, and if he can withstand that heat, he's very, very powerful. I forgot to mention this in the initial recording, so just adding this little bit here. I'm really hoping they're going to deliver more flashbacks of his journey destroying this army, right? Not because, like, I want to see key moments, but more so just to see maybe more of what built into humanity distrusting him. Because we got a pretty violent example of how powerful he was and the destruction that went in his path. So I think it'd be nice as we build up his new relationships if we get to have little flashbacks every so often that establishes more key points in the war that might simultaneously explain maybe humanity's big resentment, which they did an idea of in this episode, but I think it would go a long way if they continue to do it over the season, but I guess we'll see. I think on paper, a lot of what this episode and this anime seems to be, people are gonna not want to watch it because, oh, it's just the same show we've seen before. But I think the idea of, rather than just a hero finishing his job and then going on the slice of life adventure, which I think has been the more recent trend for those fantasy shows breaking away from the hero formula, the fact that instead, because he was shunned, he's now going to go work and try to be hired by the side he kicked ass with, and then in the process most likely grow to think that their culture is probably a lot better than the human culture that he used to defend. The big question I have is when, I mean, we probably won't see it this season. We might never see it in terms of the anime. But a big question I have to ask, and I think many people will ask, is when she probably eventually wins with Leo by her side, are the humans gonna have to be killed? Are they going to be liberated? Is the king gonna turn out to be the biggest scumbag of them all? There's these different questions I have, because clearly the demon lord wants to protect the innocent, but the innocent clearly didn't want to protect their hero, so why would they even want to follow a demon lord, right? I think it's going to end up pretty bloody by the time they actually reach the end goal, which is why I'm not surprised when you think about the premise and where it would actually lead if they got to that end point. Most likely it would have to be more on the serious, not really the comedic, given how they treated their hero in the very first episode after completing a mission that an entire army would have been destroyed attempting to do. And a single man basically one-punched man his way to victory. Didn't get a parade, didn't even get a steak. Instead, he got exiled. And that's a pretty interesting premise, all things considered. And honestly, if this one blows up or just starts a mini chain reaction that then becomes a bigger chain reaction, I wouldn't be shocked in a few years' time if the more common trope is the idea of like a hero switching to the villain side because of something similar to this, but obviously only time will tell. But thoughts if you have any on this episode. I know it aired yesterday, but I was just a little busy. Most likely you will see these videos on Tuesdays when it does air on High Dive, but I guess we'll see. Obviously we'll take it by day, week by week. But yeah, I'm excited to cover this one. I think this one will be a very fun one to discuss, and let me know what you're feeling down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you're new around here. Till next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.